All right, let's head into the Tampa Bay Rays, which for some reason, every single year always seems like they do the small little moves, but still find a way to be competitive. Last year, honestly, was probably one of their worst seasons in probably the last five, but still a pretty decent season. They still, stay competitive. And when you play them, you know that you're going to be in for a hell of a series. So far, they haven't done much in the offseason. They did bring back the hometown kid and Zach Eflin to play for the Tampa Bay Rays. I thought that was a pretty cool story. I always like when you see hometown kids come back and play, especially if it's towards the tail end of their career. I think Eflin's still got plenty of time to do what he's got to do, though. So he came out with a pretty cool quote when he got signed. He said, "I want to surround myself with a bunch of guys that just want to get better and play in the final game of the season and win it." Well, we've seen Tampa Bay get to the final game of the season. Can Zach Eflin be the guy that can get them to go farther? That's the question that obviously every Tampa fan is hoping for. But I do think they're going to need to do a little bit more. But it makes you wonder if they will, because we haven't seen that really in the past with Tampa and free agency. They don't make that big splash. They build from within and then trade when they're ready to go. They make some of the best trades probably in the MLB.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Any general manager in baseball would love to have the string of fortune that the Rays have had, because I refuse to believe that luck is not a part of it. That the way they're able to just flip talent around and get always win a trade. They've got the roster, the talent level to be able to do that. And if I'm the general manager in Tampa Bay, I'm just kind of sitting back and saying, okay, we'll gauge some interest. They were apparently interested in Jacob deGrom, which blew my mind. You don't spend money in free agency and you're going to now sign one of the most expensive pitchers ever. But you know what? It's a sign, again, that there is some money and for value that they feel is worth it. They're going to spend. So it'll be very interesting to see if that continues, though. I don't know that it's so much a general pattern as a one-off for that right player. But it doesn't matter, really. They don't need to sign one of these big arms. They've got a starting rotation that is not flashy. It's not the big names. It's certainly not expensive, but it will compete. Shane McClanahan's one of my favorite young pitchers right now, and I would trade one of my own children for him to play for Toronto, right? So they've got some work to do, though. But again, because the Tampa Bay Rays have an unbelievable well from which they can drop a massive bucket in and address the needs they need to address. So I don't think they're in panic mode or anything like that. But they certainly do have, Christian, some holes that they need to fill. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge for them.
You talk about the starting rotation, and obviously we've seen some great things from them this past season, but we did see a lot of injuries as well. Now, obviously, every team has these woes, but I feel like Tampa really dealt with some really rough injuries, especially towards the end of the season. We saw that not just the pitching staff, but we also saw it with guys like Kevin Kiermaier, Mike Zunino. We saw some pretty impactful things that might have really pushed them, and I think it did push them out of the AL East contention. Now, you talk about this deGrom thing. I've heard this before. I think you talked about it on your show with Jace from the Couch as well. I don't really believe that they were in the running. And this is my thought behind this process. Last year, they also said that they were going to be in the running and make offers for Freddie Freeman. I believe the deGrom rumors as much as I believe the Freeman rumors. But I feel like those rumors did come from the Tampa Bay organization, if you're catching where I'm getting from. I don't know if they actually did make an offer, or if they did, it was probably something that wasn't very serious. Just to say, hey, we were in the mix for the big time guys, but we didn't get them. Oh, well, I guess we'll just grow from homegrown and find ourselves back in the ALCS. So I don't know if that's the case.
Right.
But if they did say they were with deGrom, they definitely weren't serious, at least in my mind.
Well, not serious enough to pay, what Texas is paying, certainly, and that's, and maybe, maybe it's that Tampa Bay front office playing their games, their reindeer games like nobody else can. Yeah. And good on them if that's the case. If I were a fan, I'd be a little miffed if that's the only purpose of even mentioning a Jacob DeGrom, but luckily there aren't that many Tampa Bay Ray fans that are going to rage against the stadium anytime soon.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking too much here. Maybe that's just a good assumption on my side. I just can't see it. I just can't see that being the
Yeah.
case. Probably the biggest conversation and biggest storyline that we're not talking about with the Tampa Bay Rays, which we have to end that right now and talk about it, is can Randy Arozarena win his 5th in a row Rookie of the Year award this coming season, Sean?
Yeah, I mean it seems like it, right? Like every year. I mean, he was. In all honesty, if I'm not, this is just off the top of my head because I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but I think he qualified 3 years in a row.
You did, yeah.
I know we and I joke about this too on our podcast as well. But man, what a great talent! If you can,
Yeah.
if you can get 5 in a row, Rookie of the Year, you're in the Hall of Fame for sure, buddy.
Yeah, he
He's
was
the
one
only
of the
player to ever
first.
do it.
He was one of the first to hit a home run over the new wall at Orioles Stadium at Camden Yards. So I give him props for that. That alone deserved for him to get Rookie of the Year last year. I think he was finally not eligible last year. So obviously, I think that's the last time I'll make that joke. But it does seem like he has been in the running for a long time. What a good way to end off the Rays there. Again, I don't know if they're going to find a way to get back to where they were. Again, this division, I keep wanting to say conference. This division is just so interesting. And it's one of the most difficult divisions in years past. But this year, I think it's just more interesting, if anything, because we're seeing teams like the Orioles take that step up. The Yankees and the Blue Jays are kind of right now in a different tier in my mind. And then you always can't count the Rays out. I feel like no matter what, you just count the Rays out. And then it's crazy to say, but the Red Sox, a team that we have seen do so well year in and year out, are in my mind just like way below the other 4 in this division. But again, with the Rays, I just don't think you can count them out, Sean.
Yeah, no, and you can't. But one thing I think we should talk about before we leave the Rays, they need a catcher
Yes,
and
they
they need
do.
a first baseman. And what's really interesting, the only reason I think we should talk about it is because we're talking about the AL East division. And I've read a couple of things where they're interested in one of the Blue Jays catchers in Danny Jansen, Alejandro Kirk, or Gabriel Moreno. Obviously, Moreno being their preferred option, given that he's the youngest and has the most team control. It makes sense. But also on the first base side, that they were connected in some way, said to be interested in Bobby Dalbec of the Red Sox for the first base job, which I find very interesting because for an analytical team, you would think that somebody who strikes out as much as Dalbec does, would be less than appealing. However, that doesn't seem to matter. I don't know if there's anything to this whole trading within the division thing, and how much of a premium other teams would charge for that. But Christian, I think it's fascinating to me that the search for the improvements that they need may actually come from the division that
Yeah,
they play in.
interdivision trades are always interesting. I do believe that there is a premium involved with it because of the aspect behind it. However, if you are a good general manager, and we've seen that with the Rays by no doubts, if you believe that that's going to make your team better, you go for it. It doesn't matter if you're trading with whoever team. It doesn't matter if you think you're going to be able to. You're going to face the Dodgers in the World Series. If you got to trade your guy to the Dodgers, then you go and do that, and then you just test your luck in the World Series. And the same goes interdivision as well. Whether you got to play them, this year with the new schedule, you actually got to play them less. So I think the premium actually might go down, or at least the thought of trading interdivision might not feel as bad because you really have to play with, against more teams this season. Every team is playing against every team this year. Now, obviously, divisions still mean something, but just not as much moving forward. When you think about interdivision trades, and I like the one with Toronto, and I think this is a good segue because we're going to get the Blue Jays next. There's so many catchers with the Blue Jays in this system that, and obviously you got to think that one's going to be on the market and maybe one's going to be moved. If you are the Rays and you're interested in one of these catchers, you probably have to give a premium up because every one of those catchers in that system are pretty dang good, at least the ones that are being in talks right now. And you'd have to assume that that's going to be probably some kind of arm that's going to come back in that direction. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a McClanahan going back there, although you'd probably hope that you could adopt one of those catchers, make him your kid, so you could send it back over that way for McClanahan, like you said. But I just don't think that's the case. However, I do think the premium is pretty high. I mean, I think it could be something, whatever tier is below McClanahan. What would that be? Glasnow? I don't know if that's the case because he's been injured. However, something along that lines may be what it has to take to get it done. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that if you're the Blue Jays and you're looking at Tampa Bay, first of all, for me, Tampa Bay is a team that is going to compete with the Blue Jays in the division. So I'm not going to do anything to help them out. If anything, I'm going to make a trade that'll kind of take away some of that pitching prowess that they are able to just throw out there nightly. But if you're Toronto, I think you're focusing on not just pitching, but you're also thinking about the outfield as well. That you need to be able to have one more piece, preferably a left-handed bat, to go along with Kevin Kiermaier to complete the outfield. Because right now there is no corner outfielder to replace Teoscar Hernandez, and you don't have to replace him with a like for a like. You don't have to replace it with 35 home run power. You can replace it with a different type of hitter. But I think you need to look at either an outfielder, a bullpen arm, or a starting pitcher. I think the Blue Jays are kind of may have to resign the fact that they're going to run Kikuchi. You say Kikuchi out there in the fifth starter spot, and that could be fine. As a fan, I'm like, no, let's get something a little bit better. But if I'm looking to trade to the Tampa Bay Rays, I want one of those flame throwing bullpen arms at least. And then maybe another arm as well for one of my catchers. And then it just becomes which do you prefer? You know what I mean? Do you prefer Danny Jansen, who's world famous for his work with pitchers? Do you go with Alejandro Kirk, who is probably one of the best contact pure hitters in baseball?
Yeah.
Or do you go with the youth and then somewhat versatile Gabriel Moreno as well? And that's just a matter of, I think, the preference of whoever the suitor is.
Yeah, I feel like probably that the GM of the Jays and then whoever is talking is probably trying to figure out and getting a package for all three. I assume that when a team is talking to the Blue Jays, they're not just talking about one. They're probably getting a trade offer or trade package for each three or all three of
Mm-hmm.
those players, and then deciding if they're going to make pull the trigger on either of those or at least come back and offer.